What's up, everyone? Back here at Klein's Corner. Today we got a special episode for you guys. Today we go a little sports marketing. But first, we start off with some charity talk, and then we go into sports betting, some sports marketing as well, AI in sports marketing. Do it in. Let's go. Welcome back to Klein's Corner, your favorite place to get your news, knowledge, and action anywhere from books, movies, TVs, your favorite sports teams, and everyday life. Today we have a very special guest for you guys. His name, Brett Rudy. He loves baseball, but not only just baseball, he loves sports marketing as well, and is just a great guy from Boston, Mass. Brett, how you doing today?
I'm great, Jake. Thanks for having me on. Been looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about some sports marketing because it's changing a lot. I've definitely noticed whether it's like uh AI, which we'll get into today, or just every day you see street teams giving out free stuff. So yeah, let's hop in. So you've done a lot of charity work. You have your own website called Charity Hop. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, so Charity Hop is an organization that I founded with a teammate of mine. I still play amateur baseball. I'm 50 now, but when the company started, it was about 15, 20 years ago. And the company's called Charity Hop. Um, it's a double entendre, if you will. A charity hop is an easy to field ground ball, but we're also an organization that helps athletes raise money for their philanthropic endeavors. So thus charity hop, we make all of your charity needs
Mm,
easy. And the business really took off because when we started this business, um, athletes have always been involved in philanthropy and giving back, but it's always been something that's been a little bit difficult for them. And the biggest reason why is that agents get a commission based on money that the athletes make. So if an agent needs to go spend a week with a player so that they can work on some golf event, and then ultimately they're giving money away, they're not bringing money in, they're giving money away, which means the agent isn't making any money, but they need to invest that time because that's kind of part of the deal. Like they know that they need to give the athlete that time so that when it comes time to sign a contract or a big deal with Nike or Gatorade, they can get their percentage. So business like ours came along and said, you know what? Why don't you focus on doing the things that generate revenue? And why don't you just pay us and let us worry about the philanthropy obligations that the athlete needs to fulfill for their part of the contract. And that way we can go get the Gatorade contracts and the Nike contracts and you guys will just pay you some money and you guys can go off and do your thing. And thus our business took off. And we started working with athletes. The really big initiative that took off for us, it was called Charity Wines. There was a client who called us, they were in the wine business, and they said, yeah, we'd love to put out a wine with Curt Schilling. This was right when Curt Schilling came to Boston before the Red Sox had won their first World Series and got rid of their um, curse. And they said, we'd love to call it Bloody Sock Merlot because it was right after the whole Bloody
yeah.
Sock incident. And we said, well, I'm not really sure that Bloody Sock Merlot is the best name. Not really sure that that would go over well, but why don't we think about it and come back with you with some recommendations? So me and my business partner got together. We threw some ideas together and we said, well, what if we called it Shilling Chardonnay? And what if for every bottle of wine that was sold, we gave money back to a charity that's important to him. And the charity that he was supporting at the time was Kurt's Pitch for ALS. He was very involved with the ALS Association, giving back. Everybody remembers the K ALS that was on his cleat. So the client thought that was a great idea. We reached out to Curt Schilling's people, and they thought that was a great idea as well. But at the time, no active athlete had ever endorsed alcohol. Like, let that sink in for a minute. It had never, ever, ever been done. So his agent is like, yeah, I'm not really sure we're going to get into the wine business. Like, we don't really want to endorse alcohol. Now, retired players have done it all the time. Bob Uecker was doing beer commercials and, lots of players who were retired, but nobody active had ever endorsed alcohol like that. So Kurt finally said, listen, I'll do it if someone else will do it too, but I'm not doing it alone. So we're like, oh, well, that's a go. I guess we're going to make this a bigger initiative. And we reached out to a bunch of other Red Sox players. We had a great idea at the time that we could do like a wine with Mike Lowell called Mike Merlot,
Hmm.
play on Lowell and Merlot.
Yeah, that's good.
that never came to be. But we did end up partnering with Tim Wakefield and put out a wine label with him called Cabernuckle, a play on words with his knuckleball.
Yeah.
And with Manny Ramirez, we put out a wine called Manny being Merlot, which was a play on everybody was saying, oh, that's just Manny being Manny, because Manny was up to his crazy antics. So we did a wine called Manny being Merlot. And that first year, we put out wines with those three different players. We did a huge launch party at Fenway Park. Um, Hundreds of members of the media came, and we were on every TV network, every newspaper. And that first year, we sold more than 100,000 bottles for each player for their wines. And
Wow.
the second year, we were in a dozen markets. We had to do that test market the first year, and it really just took off, and it went from there. And that was sort of our that was what got us on the map in the charity business. And then from there, it just enabled us to do lots of other initiatives.
And just the sales percentage of their wines go to the charity of their choice.
Correct. And we worked that out up front. So what's always interesting is some players have charities of choice that they're very heavily involved with, but lots of players, at least back then, didn't. So when we were speaking with David Ortiz, because we worked with him the second year, we put out wines, he didn't have a charity that he donated to. I mean, when he wanted to give back, he just donated money to a specific cause. He didn't really have a specific charity that was like, this is my charity. And what he determined was, I don't want to be locked into a specific charity. I don't want to have to give all my money to this one place. So we actually helped him build the David Ortiz Children's Fund. And the beauty of the David Ortiz Children's Fund is that when all the money goes into that fund, and then each year he can earmark which charities he wants to support out of the revenue from that fund. And we were working with him when that got off the ground, and that was built for the sole purpose of supporting charity wines initially. And as we started working with more and more athletes, lots of athletes, we tied them to their very first charity because they didn't have one. And when we started working with charity wines, they said, well, who do you want to work with? And we got a feel for the types of things that they were interested in supporting. And then we'd contact a charity and we'd pair them together. Other athletes decided to go a similar direction. That David Ortiz did, where they want to have more of a fund. We worked with Ken Griffey Jr. He wanted to have a fund. Johan Santana wanted to have a fund, but there were other athletes. Bobby Abreu worked with the New York City Police Athletic League, so PAL, for instance, and we set him up with that because he didn't have a charity until we said, well, he wanted to do something near where he was playing in New York at the time. So we found a charity, we contacted them, partnered them together, and then boom, then his charity of record became the Police Athletic League of New York City. So it
Wow.
was really neat. So that by the time this initiative was done, not only did we raise a ton of money from selling bottles of wine, because $1.25 from every bottle sold went to that charity, but in many instances, we also developed those relationships that have been going on for 2 decades now. I mean, David Ortiz to this day is still running the David Ortiz Children's Fund. He has a golf event each year. I think it's in Marco Island in Florida this year, or at least it was last year. And as a result of that, he's been giving back year after year after year, long after the Charity Wines Initiative is over. And for other charities, we really just helped put them on the map because of types of the initiatives that we were putting out. I mean, it's amazing how many people didn't know what ALS was even until Kurt Schilling put it on his cleats. And then we followed up with wine labels, and then it's just taken off with other initiatives that we've done over the years, which maybe we'll get into in a little bit. But that's one of the programs that I'm really just most proud of because I think it's a lot more than just wine. We helped 30 charities really kick off in a way that they never really could have done without support from these top tier athletes.
Yeah. What's the most recent one you guys have done with
Um,
players?
so let's see. I'm looking at my wall of fame here. So, we did one with Chipper Jones, Brian McCann, Mike Schmidt, um, Eddie Eddie Murray, um, Jason Veritek, Ken Griffey Jr. I mentioned, even outside of baseball, we put out an entire line with Dan Marino called Marino Estates, where we put three different wines out for him. So it's been a minute since we put out our most recent wines. But what's interesting is, as I mentioned at the beginning, no athlete had put these wines out before. And since our initiative, lots of players have started to put out their own wine labels. Major League Baseball now even has their own labels for each team. You can go buy a Boston Red Sox wine or a San Francisco Giants wine. And all of this was because we helped pave the way by putting those wine bottles out, and now everybody's doing it.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, wine is, and it's kind of a good. It's not like a classy thing too. You're just like sipping on a nice bottle. Go, oh, Boston Red Sox. I can watch. I can. Win or lose. I'm sipping on their wine. And
Well,
also
it's really,
players.
yeah.
Like you said, a lot of players do post retirement. I know in basketball off the top of my head, Carmelo Anthony. I don't know. He loves wine. Dwayne Wade has his own company. Him and LeBron are always talking about wine. So that's really cool that you got the players to do it while they're still playing.
Yeah, I think the moment I knew we were doing something that was really making a difference was about a year after we started. And I was just watching the Red Sox, and a Budweiser commercial came on where a bunch of guys were drinking wine at the bar. And the whole commercial was about how don't drink wine, you should be drinking Budweiser instead. And it talked about all the reasons why Budweiser was better than wine. And that's how I know I made it. I'm like, we have made it if Budweiser is putting out a
Mm,
commercial to show why they're better than us. It's like I never
yeah.
put a commercial to show why wine was better than beer or Budweiser, and now they are specifically coming after us. And I'm like, we made it. We made it. We're on Budweiser's radar.
Do you personally like how much, if you're gonna rank, I don't know if you drink or not, but if you're gonna rank the different kinds of alcohols, wine at the top for you?
I mean, I'm an IPA guy. I love a good IPA. Um, I'm not a big fan of American beers otherwise. Like when I go to Europe, I love drinking like a lager or
Hmm.
something. It's just so different than it is here in the US. But here I'm very much a beer snob, and I love my IPAs, but also drink a lot of red wine. And I will be the first to admit that as much wine as I drank, I mean, one of the benefits of working on charity wines, every player that we put a wine label out with, part of the deal, part of our arrangement through the wineries was that we got a case of that wine.
Mm.
So I did 30 players, 30 times 12, that's 360 bottles of wine that I had. Like there was a 10-year period where there was nothing but MLB wines in my basement. Um, for as much wine as I've drank, I really don't know a whole lot about it. I mean, I
Yeah.
obviously know what a Merlot is and what a Zinfandel is and a Petit Syrah. Like I know my different varietals, but if you put them all in front of me and gave me a taste test, like I know what I like, and I can talk to you about tasting notes, but I'm kind of BSing my way through it. Like I don't really know what I'm talking about. I just know what wine I like and what wine I don't. But you asked me what my drinks are. I like a good red wine and I like an IPA. And which one I drink, I guess, depends on how much room is in my stomach at any given moment.
That is yeah, an IPA, they're good. They fill you up for sure. They definitely fill you up. My dad used to work for I don't know if you heard of it, Lagunitas.
Yes.
Yeah, so he used to work for Lagunitas. So um when I moved up for college, when I was when especially when I got to 21, he would send me up with cases of Lagunitas. So that was always really nice. I got to try the different kinds too, like the seasonal ones. So definitely IPA. Yeah, I've always get I like a Pilsner as well. Those are when I went to school up in Bellingham, Washington. They had a brewery called uh they had one beer. Their Chestnut Brewery. It was called Chestnut Pilsner. It's just one of my favorite ones. It's just smooth. So yeah, beer's good. Wine is something that I would like to get into more. Um, it's hard because it's nice because you can there's sometimes wine can be really cheap and you really don't really know the difference between the good one, the different cheap wines. Then sometimes I feel it would be nice to buy a nice, like, above average price and have it with like a nice pairing of salmon or cheese. I have a friend. Shout out Gabe Rosenblum. He is training to be a sommelier, so he's really big into wines. He worked for a bunch of wine companies, actually in Boston, in Mass. He worked for Barefoot. I forgot what the parent company is called that he worked for. But he's really big into wine, so he got me into it for a little bit. So we talked about your charity work. Let's talk about marketing. You've been in marketing for, let's say, I think over 30 years or about 30 years from when you interned back in
Most.
94.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess, gosh, if you include my internships, I guess it has been 30 years. Frightening, frightening.
yeah, yeah. So what have you seen in marketing? What changes have you seen over the past 30 years, and has anything stayed the same? What's changed the most?
I mean, I think what's stayed the same is the need to create a demand for customers and solve a problem for them. And that has not changed. What has changed is the channels in which you can reach those
Hmm.
individuals. I was talking to somebody online the other day, and he had a really great tweet that I responded to, and we started a conversation. He's the vice president of marketing at a watch company, and I don't remember what it's called, or I'd give him a free plug. Sorry about that. Um, but he was saying that he doesn't really, they're not selling the ability to tell time. If you want the ability to tell time, you can just pull out your phone, or you can go look at a clock on the wall, or you can ask somebody. What they're really selling is status. Somebody wants to go out and look really nice with a watch on,
Hmm.
and people can see, and that's their style, and it conveys the type of person that you are. So I responded to him and I said, that's really an interesting take. That makes a lot of sense for luxury goods, but what about necessity goods? There are necessities. And I said, well, what about like a sponge? Like, you need a sponge because you need to clean your dishes. And his response was, well, do you need a sponge, or do you really need clean dishes? And if what you want is clean dishes, you don't need a sponge. You could use a sponge. You could get a dishwasher. You could hire a maid. There's lots of ways you could clean your dishes. And I think the point was really that in marketing, you really need to solve that solution that people want. What are people trying to achieve? And that product, that demand that you're creating something for, it's just a product. And there's lots of ways to solve that. So I'll give you an example. We were talking about baseball. That's how we met, actually. For those who are tuned in, Jake and I met. We were both working at the All-Star game in Seattle last year, and we met that way. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure. Um, but MLB is just one product. There's lots of baseball out there. There's minor league baseball, and there's amateur baseball.
So many leagues, it's
There's so
insane.
many leagues out there. And I think that the point is, well, why does everybody believe that Major League Baseball is the product? Well, because marketing tells you it is. I mean, even in football, the USFL tried to come out with another product, the XFL tried to come up with another product. If you look to golf, you now have LIV, it's not just PGA anymore. So we are in this belief set that there's four sports out there, and there's NFL and NBA and NHL and MLB. But the reality is, like, that's not even the case. Like, that's only true because marketing tells you it's true.
Yeah.
Pickleball came out of nowhere in the last year or two. I mean, that wasn't even a thing, and all of a sudden it's this huge sport. So I guess I'm going around a little bit, but you asked me sort of what changed and what stayed the same. Like, I think it will always be about solving a problem, but what's just really changed are the channels in which you do that. Like, digital marketing wasn't a thing when my career started. I remember my first job out of college, I was working on databases to manage customer lists so that we could email people messages. Like, that was new at the time. And then social media came along that
Oh
didn't
yeah.
exist. I was working for Gillette selling nail blades and razors, and I actually built the very first Twitter page for them and YouTube page for them. I was working for Neiman Marcus when we built the very first online auction. That was before eBay existed. eBay didn't even
Wow.
exist. exists. And we built the first online auction so that we could build a custom Lamborghini that could be sold at a Neiman Marcus store in Beverly Hills. And Tony Danza was there. He was real hot back in those days. And he was going to be there to help move the auction forward. And people could either bid on their computers or call in. And I'd like to believe that because of the success of that, that maybe eBay came along. So technology has changed, which has made the channels change, but the ability to solve your problem has remained constant through the years.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into social media a little more later. Uh, one question I have is, so we talked about the four, the four main professional sports leagues, and I would say you could say in the world, I would say in the world, but in the US is, MLB, NBA, NFL, NHL. And obviously, I mean, definitely, baseball. Actually, I think baseball is a bigger market than the NBA when I looked up, like how much it does in revenue. But obviously, NHL is like the little half step brother, whatever you want to call it. How do you think? Because they're just such a smaller market. I mean, players get paid less. How do you think NHL kind of keeps up with trying to, stay relevant or at least stay kind of in the race between just trying to make as much money as the other leagues?
I mean, I think what the NHL's challenge is that you got to play on ice. And in most parts of the country, people aren't playing on ice. And you're much likely
Mm,
to watch a sport if it's a sport that you were going to play growing up. And
yeah,
much where people can play hockey growing up because there's just no ice. I live in Boston. I got guys that are buddies of mine, even still at the age that they are now, and they're still playing pond hockey all the time. It's what we do up here. And that's not something you can do in Florida or Texas or Southern California or even middle parts of the country. So hockey is always going to struggle in that way. And that's why the NHL is so dependent on Canada because it's cold up there and people
yeah,
people play. So I don't think that the NHL will ever be able to compete in the United States with the other types of sports that people can play year round because people just aren't playing it. And if they're not playing it growing up, they're not going to watch it as an adult. So I think that's where they have their challenges. Also, you were talking about revenue for the different leagues. And I think what's interesting to note there is that revenue and attendance, it's all heavily misleading numbers that I feel like the media somewhat manipulates based on whatever story that they're writing, based on how often they play. So if you're an NFL team and you play 17 times a year and maybe you only have 8 home games, if you have 8 home games, you are going to have a packed stadium every single game. And the secondary
hmm
market is going to explode and the tickets are going to be expensive. It's going to be outrageous. And then when you have a playoffs, as they do in the NFL, where every single series is best of one, there's only one game and it's going to decide it all. Of course, the ticket prices go through the roof. Now compare that to MLB. I got 162 games. I have 81 home games to choose from. 81. Compare that to NHL to NFL we just talked about. It's 10 times more games. So
hmm
I don't have the demand. I can just go whenever I want. I don't need to buy tickets as early. I'll just buy tickets when I want. Now there's exceptions, of course. I mean, you look to LA and with Shohei and what the tickets are going for. But many of the stadiums, you can just walk up and sit wherever you want. I mean, look what happened with Oakland. I mean, they had more people at their minor league team than they did their major league team, and thus they're moving to Vegas. Um,
yeah,
so I think when you got to really look at how spread out the schedule is, and
yeah,
that influences how many people go to any given game and also the ticket prices. And when you add it all together, I I mean I haven't looked at the numbers, but I would bet that an MLB team with 81 games brings in more ticket revenue than an NFL team with 8 home games. Now, maybe they don't bring in as many viewers on television for any given game,
yeah.
but you add it all together, what is being watched more? I don't know. I'd have to look it up, but I would bet that it's a lot closer than you think. And the answer might surprise you.
Yeah, also I think a huge thing just from, just kind of watching the game of baseball for so long is that when a certain player goes to a certain market, they just bring in the revenue, the viewership, like you said. I didn't. I mean, I. It makes sense that the Dodgers tickets the prices are going up so much. But I think I was talking to my buddy about this. He paid Shohei, all that money, and he's deferring it. If they paid him, 10 years, $700 million, and he's deferring 698 million. I think they can make all of that money just from ticket sales, sponsorships from with Shohei, and jersey sales, and maybe, I mean, this is kind of wild guess, but maybe 4 years, just because he sells like crazy. There's a picture of Drake on his Instagram story wearing a Shohei Ohtani All-Star jersey. So if
Right.
Drake's wearing one of the biggest names in the world, probably one of the most popular names that everyone knows, he's wearing a Shohei Ohtani jersey, a baseball jersey, and it was an All-Star game jersey. So, and he's from Toronto, so you would think he would kind of wear a Toronto Blue Jays jersey, but he's wearing a Shohei Ohtani jersey. That's huge.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, I think what's interesting about these contracts is they've continued to grow at an exponential rate. I remember
yeah.
the first time a player made like 5 million and I was like, that's nuts. This has to stop. And then it became 10 million. And I'm like, this is absolutely crazy. It needs to stop. And then it went from 20 to 30 to 40 with Max Scherzer and now 50 or 70 million a year. I don't know when this ends. Every time it hits a new peak, I'm like, it couldn't possibly go any higher, and then it does. And I just think that the entire business model has to shift. So you think about the fact that he signed a 10-year deal. And baseball or any sport at the end of the day, it's just media. It's you're selling entertainment. Jake, what do you want to go watch tonight? You can either go watch Netflix, you can go watch Hulu, maybe you can go to a bar with your friends, or maybe you turn on the ball game. You have a choice that you need to make. And are you watching a Dodgers game to see Shohei, or is everybody playing fantasy sports now because DraftKings and FanDuel and everything is just taken off so much that you're now just watching players so that you can see if you're hitting your parlays by this
hmm
player getting 3 hits and this guy getting 10 strikeouts. And if all you're doing is looking for individual performances that are happening because of some bet that you have, it all of a sudden doesn't matter so much what the Dodgers do as long as Shohei's getting his hits. I mean, everybody knows the famous joke before Shohei left. It's like Shohei Ohtani goes 5 for 5, Trout goes 7 for 7, and the Angels lose 10 to 6.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the joke. It's because, people are so focused on the player now that it's less about the team. So I just wonder how this pays out for the Dodgers come year 7, 8, 9, 10. I think they need to front load the profit here because one, he's going to get older. So players are always better at the beginning of their contract because you're paying them based on how they did last year, not paying them based upon how they're going to do 10 years from now. And the second thing, just think about how much technology has changed in the last 10 years. I mean, Meta wasn't even a company 10 years ago. Uber wasn't a company 10 years ago. I don't think Amazon Prime existed 10 years ago. Maybe it did, but I don't think it did 10 years ago. So now Shohei in 10 years, like what media are you going to be able to find your sports on in 10 years? Like you can't even answer that because the solution probably hasn't even been invented yet. Um,
Yeah, it's
people are watching games on their cell phones, on Twitch, on Hulu now and Amazon. Like it's not just turn on Nesson or WGN or it's just a very, very changing game. So that the way the revenue is going to come in is just going to so drastically change.
and cable TV is dying like crazy. And the new media rights deal for the NBA, they're supposed to I read an article on the Ringer, and it's at two I think the uh average revenue right now is like 2.3 billion, and then it's supposed to, could go up to 8 billion with Amazon and Apple bidding. The NBA in season tournament, my prediction, it will be called the Amazon in season tournament because
It's
Amazon will
only a matter
spend,
of time.
yeah. And
But look what's
like,
happening in college right now. These
hmm
bowl players aren't even going to the bowl games because they're like, I don't want to go to a meaningless game because I'm supposed to sign some $10 million signing bonus next year with an NFL team, and I don't want to get hurt in a bowl game. Like, can you imagine what these NBA players are saying about playing in these mid-season tournaments? And they're trying to sweeten the pot by giving them $500,000 as a bonus to play in the game, or if you win maybe I forget it's if you play in it or if you win it, it's an extra $500,000. But that's a lot for you or me. But what's $500,000 for a basketball player who's making $25 million a year to begin with. Like, why would they want to play in that and risk messing up their careers?
I think they play. So it's if I can remember off the top of my head, I definitely know if you win the tournament, it's 500,000. If you play in the if you in the semi, if you play in it, like the losing team gets 250. I think quarterfinals are 50, and the semis are 150. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I definitely know that the final, if you win the finals, it's 500K, and if you make it there, it's 250. I think they play for the guys that are on either two-way contracts or, second round picks that get paid maybe, a million, 1.5 at the most. I think it's good. They play, for the league, because their viewership is super low in December and November and all because football, everyone's watching football. Like, there's been games where there's been times where I just watch football instead of basketball, and I have league pass. I'm a huge NBA fan, but when football season's over, I'll be watching Magic games at 4 p.m. because they're so early, or I'll be staying up till watching Laker games at staying up till 9:30, because that's kind of really the only thing on. But my point being, I think they do it, just for the point of the league and to give them that viewership, but also win it for the guys that aren't getting paid as much as well. But going back to my point, uh, also, the viewership with cable's dying. I know that in Seattle, the Xfinity, they charged, so it used to be for Root Sports, which is the cable network where they should do the Mariners, Kraken, not the Sounders anymore, but the Mariners and Kraken and some Gonzaga. But it used to be part of like the regular sports package where I believe you get the NFL Network and NBA TV, but now it's part of like the premium because I don't think they're making enough money. Um, so I think, and if everything might, like you said, you don't know what it's going to be like in 10 years when it comes to where you watch your games. Like cable could be pretty much dead in 10 years and everything you just watch streaming because that's the
Right.
current rate is what
But
I'm seeing.
yeah, but even merchandising, right? Because that's one of the
Hmm.
big pillars of revenue. And again, Shohei is an exception to every rule here. But I remember reading somewhere that jersey sales for Shohei in his first weekend or his first week or something like that broke a record for most jersey sales ever in that window, which
For
wasn't
the Wasn't he sorry when he came in on the Angels or the Dodgers?
no, to the Dodgers, like,
Yeah.
recently.
Hmm.
Uh, the report was like in the first weekend or the first week, I forget what, but the jersey sales for Shohei was more than they had ever had, according to Fanatics, during that period of time. And I think, again, and I'm not saying this is right or even legal, but my Facebook feed is filled with foreign companies that are selling jerseys that look incredibly authentic for 36.99 or 29.99. And as someone who runs a baseball league, by the way, a lot of our teams order those jerseys. They can't afford a $160 customized MLB
Yeah.
jersey. So
So expensive.
they're ordering the ones from China that cost like 36 bucks. You get your name on the back, that, stitched letters, stitched numbers, and nobody can tell the difference. Technology has improved so much. And of
Yeah.
course, they're all counterfeit, and MLB is not getting a cut, and the players aren't getting their cut. But this is another one of those examples of, you just have to wonder, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. Like, I know this because I run a baseball league and I have all the teams, and all those guys are buying their uniforms in bulk. So they're going there. How long is it going to be before the general public realizes, why should I go to Dodger Stadium and pay 219 bucks for this jersey when I can get one that looks exactly the same for 10% of the cost, 15% of the cost? And
Definitely.
the people are going to catch on to that, and maybe Facebook will shut those sellers down so they don't show up in your feed, but they haven't done it yet. I mean, they're filling up your feed quickly. I see them all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned the fake jerseys because I'm not if the government is listening to me, I am not saying that I have been one of those people that have bought those jerseys, but I'm not saying I have.
Right.
When I was oh God, I think it was sixth grade, so I was 12, back in 2012, like the prime Seahawks years. I remember getting a is either Russell Wilson or Marshawn Lynch, one of the ones from China. And back then, you could definitely tell a difference back then. My dad got a baseball one. Yeah, I think he got I think it was a Nolan Ryan Houston Astros one, the one with the white and like the orange and the It was like orange, white, the little star. I think he got like a Reggie Jackson Oakland A's jersey too. But yeah, the baseball ones are definitely harder to tell. You can tell with the stitching, but those ones compared to the football ones are definitely a lot harder to tell, and it's definitely worth something like yeah, like you said, it was like 50 after shipping. I remember it was yeah, oh God, it's probably like $50, maybe if that. And then
So
they
I'll give you
also
a really, yeah.
yeah,
I'll
and
give you
it's
oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, it's fun because they didn't. It's not even just jerseys; they sell hats and everything else too.
So I'll give you a really funny story. As you, being from Boston, where I am, as you are probably aware, we hate the Yankees around here. And um, maybe 15, 20 years ago, there was a minor league team called the Lowell Spinners. And the Lowell Spinners created this program. One of their young marketing guys, had this crazy idea. Let's come out with a program. We'll call it the Yankee Elimination Program. Um, Now, what is that, you might ask? What they did is they put this offer out to little leagues and youth programs all across New England and said, if you have a team in your league and they're named the Yankees and you would wish to change your name to the Spinners, we will give your team free jerseys. And everybody took advantage of this. Like to this day, when you go into a little league, they're like all MLB team names and the Spinners. Like to this day, because all of these teams got rid of the Yankees. And it's so hard to find a Yankees team now, because those teams were replaced with Spinners teams like 15 years ago, and the Spinners have just kept on going. But the reason that I brought this up, because we did this in my adult league. And at the time, I was the commissioner of an 18 plus division, so these are guys that used to play college ball. They're big, full adults, and they got these jerseys, and they were almost more like flag football jersey kind of thing. Like they were really thin and they ripped, and like for adults, they just weren't doing the trick. So team in our league, they ended up scrapping those jerseys and they stayed the Spinners to this day. They're still the Spinners, but they ended up buying their own jerseys. But anyway, the point is that those cheap jerseys from like 15, 20 years ago, today, can't even tell the difference. The
Hmm.
quality is just so good. Um, and it's so inexpensive. And I think people will catch on. And then when they do, MLB is going to need to find a way around it because they're spending too much money on Shohei to have people watch the game on their cell phone instead of going to the ballpark, to buy the jerseys from Japan off Facebook instead of going and getting it from Fanatics or the merch store on MLB. Like, MLB really has five places where they're making money. They're media, merch, tickets, concessions, and sponsorship. And if you start taking those away little by little, or because you're giving their fans access to those five things in other places, then how are you going to pay for these athletes? And you can get away with it for Shohei and for Trout and for Harper and for Seaver and the other people who are on the top 10 payroll, list of people being paid. But what about everybody else?
Hmm. The MLB needs they need a Taylor Swift. They need someone who can come in and put them. I mean, the NFL was probably the most popular sport in the US. But they need if they got someone like a Taylor Swift equivalent, that would help a lot too. I
I
would
mean, it's
love
funny
that.
too because it's not, she can't possibly be the first musician who's ever dated an athlete. I mean, what about J-Lo and A-Rod?
A-Rod, yeah.
That was never
Well,
as big as this.
yeah, well, it's even I mean, I'm sure Derek Jeter had a lineup of I mean, he's married now and has kids, but in the past I know he had some very famous girlfriends, some models and other and celeb or actresses. Well, honestly, it's like Taylor Swift thing was probably it was on. I don't know how popular she was back then, um, but I'm sure she was when Tom Brady started dating Giselle, that kind of because she was probably the number one model in the world at that time. And I don't know, I can't look. Maybe there is data for sales and viewership back then. But if the Mariners, I mean, that's sorry, if MLB got something like someone who would be. I mean, Taylor Swift's almost to the point where she's synonymous with the NFL, kind of. Um,
She is now, at least,
yeah.
you know, for better or for worse.
Hmm. And she's helped. I wrote an article. It was the day after she was on TV. I wrote an article called "Is Taylor Swift the new brand ambassador for the NFL?" And she kind of is, and it goes into what I'll get talk about social media and marketing, and the different like TikToks and the kind of, because a lot of stuff they would, when they use social media, like the different teams. I mean, it's really the percentage of the viewerships and how it reaches their fans or their audience is a lot higher than the other ways, like websites or newsletters and kind of stuff like that. Like really, the number one option is social media. Before we get into social media, I want to talk about sports betting. How do you feel about sports betting? Are you a fan of it? Do you ever do it? 38 states now offer legal sports betting. Washington doesn't, where I live. Shout out Seattle. But do you sports bet?
I have literally only sports bet maybe 3 or 4 times in my life. And it was more because I wanted to try it. I remember I was at Encore, which is a casino in Everett, Massachusetts, and they had the sports book already, but it wasn't open yet because it hadn't become legal. It was becoming legal in like a week. And there were a bunch of, they had the girls there, and they're like, oh, you can get a free hat that says, oh, man, now I don't even remember. This is an example of bad marketing. I can't even remember the name of the casino that the sports bet that I had that cap for. But anyway, they gave me a free cap, and they gave me like $100 of bonus bet if I would sign up for an account. And they put the app on my phone, and they watched me do it, and they registered. And then I bet on my first game, and I won. And it's weird because I bet like mid game. It's like the first inning or second inning, and it's like, okay, based on what the score is right now, this is what the odds are now, and then I could bet on the game. And I didn't like it because I was watching the game for all the wrong reasons. I was like, okay, they got to win, but they got to win by 4, and oh, running out of innings. And it's like that's not how I want to enjoy the game. Like I'm supposed to be watching it for like, okay, well, this is what you do in this situation, and I want to get
Hmm.
this hitter up because I want this to happen, and then I want this pitcher to come in. Like I shouldn't be rooting for specific outcomes on any given play. And I feel like sports betting has made that happen. And in fact, fantasy sports has done that a lot too, like
Oh,
long
for
before betting,
sure.
especially in football, way more than baseball. But like now people watch the game. I mean, you see the get-ups in their room. Heck, you might even have this yourself, where they have like 6 TVs sitting down and they just watch all these different games at the same time. And the reality is they don't give a crap who wins. They just want this player to perform well, this player to perform well, this offensive line to do well. And maybe they're betting on this team, so these guys got to win by 7. And it's like, man, what happened to like just wanting your team to win? So I feel as if sports betting, it's very, very good for betting. Very, very good for for DraftKings and FanDuel and win bets and all of those other people who are making money off the betting. But I'm wondering if it's actually good for the game,
Hmm.
because there are people still following strategy of the game. And I think part of this is why, Manfred wants MLB to be faster. I think a true baseball fan, I'd if I go to the ballpark with my dad, I want to spend 3 hours at the ballpark with my dad because I haven't seen him in a while. And we're going to go to a game, and we're going to have some hot dogs and peanuts and Cracker Jack and all the things you're supposed to do at a ball game. We're going to go there early for batting practice. Now you're going to tell me I only get to spend 2 hours with my dad because you want a faster game. Now, why do you want a faster game? So that you can have more plays during a 4 hour window so that more people can bet on plays. You don't want the games to be over at 11 anymore. You want them to be over by 10. Why? Because you don't want people to sleep that last hour because they can't bet on games if they're sleeping. So, you talk about why
Hmm.
are they speeding up the games? Well, it's because people are bored by it. It's like, well, no, not really. But there are two things. One, there are just as many commercials in a fast game as in a short game, just as many. But if people are sleeping through it, they're not watching those hour of commercials. And if I'm sleeping through the last hour, then I can't bet on the game. So for those two reasons, Manfred wants to crack it all down, get it done faster so that people can bet on them before they go to sleep and watch the commercials before they go to sleep. But is it better for the game? I can't think of a single reason why a pitcher should be forced to rush faster. And people say, well, do you really want to watch this guy scratch his nuts before his at bat? Like, is that really action? I'm like, okay, you've clearly never watched. Like, I like watching the announcers talk. I liked the buildup. I like when there was an intentional walk that he would have to throw 4 pitches, and everybody in the stadium would boo and stand up and throw popcorn because you're intentionally walking this guy and booing him. And the fact that it took an extra 45 seconds, those 45 seconds were awesome, because if you're intentionally walking somebody, it's about to lead up to a really big play. You're probably going to have the bases loaded now with the game on the line. That's why you intentionally walk the guy. Or man on first and second now, you're looking for a double play. That's why you intentionally walk the guy. And you're going to speed that up by not forcing the 4 pitches because you want to speed up and lose 45 seconds. You're taking the best dramatic moment out of that game and ruining it because it's not action. It's not action, it's drama. So you look at betting and commercials, like all of this stuff, fantasy, it all comes into play. And the game has shifted away from being about 9 innings and who wins and who loses. It's not even about that anymore. Can the pro sports profit on all of these other things that happen around the game? Can they profit from the betting? Can they profit from fantasy? Can they profit from the commercials? It's not about speeding up the game so that people are happier. Don't be fooled from that narrative.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I never thought about, speeding up the game for betting purposes. For the rule changes, the pitch clock, I could really care less, but I think people liked it. Especially I had more friends come to games with me the past season because I told them, "Oh, there's a pitch clock, so the game's not as long." I just really think, it depends what kind of, like, the true baseball fans will either tell you, like, I don't care, or they'll say, like yourself, don't change the game. But I never realized that for the betting purposes, like trying to speed up the games. And so that's really interesting. How do you think, in terms of how they market the sports betting, do you think they overdo it, or do you think that's just the way it is now? Like yesterday, I was watching the Thursday night game, and Amazon, even just during the commercial breaks, it was Amazon Prime and DraftKings sponsor, and Ryan Fitzpatrick was a spokesperson, and all these the sports books. MGM has Jamie Foxx, Caesars they've had a commercial with the whole Manning family minus the grandson Arch Manning, but it was Cooper, Peyton, Eli, and even Archie Manning. And they had JB Smoove. DraftKings has Kevin Hart and Ryan Fitzpatrick. And they're constantly, just bombarding ads during sports games. Do you think they overdo it, and are they doing it successfully if they, in the way that they're doing it?
So it depends on who you're asking. If you're asking Brett, the baseball fan, I would say, yeah, they're overdoing it. They should knock it off. They're killing these sports. I don't like watching the game and then on the bottom of the screen, it tells me the percentage that the Red Sox are going to win. Like, how about you let me watch the game? Like, that's why you play the game. You don't need to show me the percentages down at the bottom. However, if you're asking me as Brett, the marketer, imagine that you are the brand manager for MLB and tickets have already gone on sale. They've already sold out the game, so you can't sell any more tickets and you can't sell any more concessions because the people who are going to buy hot dogs are already going to buy hot dogs. And the people who are going to buy the jerseys have already bought the jerseys. And now you're tasked with, all right, we need to find ways, Jake, that we can get incremental revenue. What ideas do you have? Well, we can't sell more games because we only get 81 games. We can try to make the playoffs, but we're not really a playoff caliber team, so we can't get more games. What could we do to get more money? So all the smart people sit around and they say, well, and we can't sell any more commercials because we only have so many commercials on TV. They're like, well, what if we put on a show and we call it a show, but it's really just a 30-minute advertisement for betting? And then we get more people to spend money that way. So, oh, great idea. Why don't we put one on and see how much revenue it generates? So they put this TV show on, and then while the game is on, everybody's betting on it. And
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously, what is it doing? It's training everybody to learn how to bet. You got kids
Yeah.
that are in middle school that know how to bet now. Why? Because they were trained. Because they watched their TV show to see how it was done. If there was a commercial on that said, here, this is Win Bets. I'm going to teach you how to bet. Watch my 30-second commercial and we'll show you how. Nobody watches commercials, but you put it on as a show and you get all these big names that you just talked about talking loud and exciting, and you have big starbursts and they make this whole thing exciting. Now these kids want to be part of the action. Because guess what? I play baseball, but I'm never going to be good enough to be a Major League Baseball player. But you know what? Shohei Ohtani and I both have in common that we can both do tonight. We can both bet on the same game. I can do that tonight, and so can he. And I can do it at the exact same level as anybody else. I can go bet on the exact same game. I can go bet on the same parlay.
MLB players, they can bet, but just they can, but not on baseball though. That's
Correct.
correct. Yeah.
Correct. But yeah, Shohei's obviously not playing any MLB games tonight. But
Mhm.
my point is, if he can go to the casino and play poker and blackjack, so can I. He can go bet on an NBA game, so can I. And what it does is it's this great equalizer. Anybody with any athletic ability whatsoever, you could be an old person, young person, athletic, non-athletic. What they all have in common? They can all bet on that same parlay. And maybe one bets more than the other, but they're all sharing in the success or the lack of success based on that bet that they played. And that's what betting allows people to do. And that's why
Hmm.
it's so successful and taking off now in ways that it's never done. It used to be this whole thing, you had the bookies in a side alley and they'd be writing on their little pads and you'd be smuggling in the money to them and they'd break your knees if you didn't pay them off. I mean, those days, maybe they still happen somewhere, but for the most part, like like you said, 30 something states have gambleized betting right now. Now, what it really is, it's an opportunity for fans at any age, at any athletic ability, to participate in the game on a level playing field in a way that they've never been able to do before. I'm not, and that's why it's taking off in this way. Now, and why is the government allowing it to happen? Because they get their cut.
They get the tax, and because it makes a lot of money for taxes too.
Yeah, they get their cut.
It's funny because best sports betting was started by the mafia too. Like the just honestly betting in general. It started by the mafia back in New York, and then they went to Vegas and opened up all the casinos. It was really frowned upon, but like see 30, so 70 years ago, but now it's the biggest thing. I was watching an NBA game on the NBA app, and it was showing the live odds while I was watching the game on the bottom left, and I was just super. I mean, didn't it surprised me? But then 2 seconds later, I'm like, okay, this makes sense. Betting is everything nowadays. So it's just crazy how much it's changed. But also, and also ESPN Bet has a thing now, which it's just interesting. I didn't think ESPN would come out and play, or maybe they decided, okay, it's our viewership's maybe going down. We had to cut a lot of staff. So I mean, they're late to the party. And then the Fanatics is also going to do some betting kind of system as well. So, there's a lot of, and some other companies you never will come out with stuff as well. So it's interesting how much it's booming. Also, another thing that I noticed about betting is how they kind of get people, what's the like the not the money grabber, but the way they draw people in, to entice them. DraftKings has they constantly were saying yesterday, oh, the no sweat bet, or like you said when you went to the casino, they'll match your $100 deposit or something, or if you bet $5, we'll give you $100 in bonus bets, that kind of stuff. How do you think that's a huge part of the success of the betting, of sports betting?
I think it's successful in drawing new people in. Right.
Hmm.
So the challenge with betting is it's kind of a new thing. I mean, betting isn't new as something that humans could do. Like you said, the mafia has been doing it for decades. But for the average person who wasn't placing bets with the mafia, your mom or your English teacher, just for the regular old person, all of a sudden there's something that's legal. It's not unhealthy, like doing drugs or smoking or drinking, if you will. I mean, it's unhealthy, obviously, if you start losing all your money, but it's something that's easy enough to do. But the challenge is it's not something that anybody had done other than a handful of people. So how do you lure all of those people in? Initially, And and this is all marketing. How do you lure somebody new in? You got to give them a reason to try. And the reason to try is here, have $100 on us. What the one that I signed up for, I got it was like your first bet, if you lose, it's free. Meaning I bet $100, and if I win, I get $100. But if I lose, I don't lose my 100. I still get to keep my 100. So it was called like a risk-free first
Yeah.
bet. I'm
Yeah,
like,
that kind of stuff.
wow, that's amazing. Like, think about it. I mean, imagine if you could go do that with like drinking a vitamin water, and
Hmm.
you walk into the grocery store and it says, here, buy the vitamin water. If you don't like the vitamin water, just bring the empty glass back and we'll give you your money back. Now, maybe you liked it and just gave it back anyway because you wanted your dollar back, but they don't care because now vitamin water is like, haha, I got you to try it. And even though you got your dollar back, next time you go shopping, you're going to buy like a 12 pack of vitamin water. And I think betting is the same way. Like, you walk into a casino, you can't even place a $20 bet on blackjack. Like, the minimum table is like 50 on a Friday night.
Yeah.
So they're giving you $100. You know what? I'm gonna win or lose, I'm gonna put another $100 down in the first 5 minutes. And so you think of $100 like, oh my God, how many hours do I gotta make to make $100 after tax?
Yeah.
Like, that's really good money. But for them, they're like, they're gonna lose that in 5 minutes. If they lose it, if they win, they would have won anyway. And if they lose, they're just gonna reinvest it and it'll be gone in 5 minutes. Who cares?
Yeah, when I was in Vegas for my cousin's high school graduation. My dad and I went to, I think it was Caesars, and they had the sports book. And well, I wanted to do because I'm not very good at poker, but I like playing blackjack. But I remember the minimum bet was like $30. I'm like, yeah, I would rather not. And even for the sports betting, I made a few bets, but each bet was maybe I think the most I ever bet on was $10 I'm just because I didn't want to lose a bunch of money, but it was also fun doing it. So that's the other thing too, is how much money do you want to spend, but it's also how much do you want to lose? Because be like people during the Super Bowl, I would like to look that statistic up of how much money is bet during the Super Bowl. Because I went to a Super Bowl party and this one guy was getting really upset and he was getting super mad because he bet so much money on it was the Bengals and the Rams Super Bowl, and he's like, "Oh, bet a bunch of money on the Bengals," which I thought was the smart decision because that defense, the Rams defense, they had Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald was just a beast. So he was really upset about that. But yeah, he lost a lot of money. So I'm like, oh, that's your problem. You bet all this money.
So here's what here's my prediction. You want my prediction?
Yeah, let's hear it.
It'll either be this year or next year. You were asking about betting and how it's taking off. It's all about trial. You need to get more people to try it, and then some percentage of them will get hooked and they'll keep on going. So
Hmm.
where's the one place that everybody does bet, even if they're not gamblers, and that's squares during Super Bowl. Everybody does that. The guy walks around the office, hey, you want to buy a square? 50, half of the winnings will go to my kid's little league, or it's going to go to this lady Beth who's really sick and has cancer, or maybe you just split it with everybody there. But everybody participates in the squares, even those who aren't gamblers. And it's kind of a pain in the ass. Everybody does it slightly differently. Some people just write it down on a piece of paper the old-fashioned way. Some do Excel. Some maybe have some sort of software. But I think as you start to see these bigger organizations like the DraftKings and all of these organizations, and a lot of them might have this already, where they set up the squares, but do it in such a way that you can have people do it for free. So for instance, you work at some company and you want to do a Super Bowl squares for your company. They'll just be like, here, we'll do it for free. We're not going to charge you. We don't want to make any money off you. We're just going to allow you the service, and you'll know instantly who wins and how many people have bet and how many squares are open. And they'll provide that as a service. But what's in it for them, you would say? Well, there's 100 squares in a Super Bowl square, and by the time it's done, maybe they'll have 100 new leads. The people that they didn't have before, which now they can market to, and now they can actually get them to bet on real games. And if they can convert, say, 2% of those people, which for a lot of businesses, that they would consider that about a normal conversion rate, that's two people. And if they got those two people and those two people are spending a grand a week on gambling, and there's a 10% edge to the market, then they just, think about it, just multiply that out and see how much money they can make. So I think that that's one of the things that you're really going to start to see this Super Bowl is you're going to start to see all of these casinos telling people to use them for their Super Bowl squares. And you might have been able to do that before, but this year you're going to see it promoted. And I don't know this. I haven't seen any press releases that said this is going to happen, but I'm telling you, this is the year when it will happen because they need to get more people on the platforms. And now that it's legal everywhere, they're going to get people on the platforms.
What do you mean? I'm actually kind of good. What do you mean the squares, the betting squares?
So have you seen the Super Bowl squares where like you put your name on and it's like, okay, well, if the Patriots have score ends in 7 and then the Bears score ends in 3, like then I win. And they do that every
Oh,
quarter.
it's like the point. Is it the point differential?
No, 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 no. So you imagine a grid that's like one,
Yeah.
2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And then down the other side, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And then I buy a square, and then I'm randomly given a square out of that 10 by 10 grid. And the square that I might get is like 49ers end in 9 and Bears end in 2. And at the end of the first quarter, if the Bears score is ending in a 2 and the 49ers score is ending in a 9, then I win. And then they do it again at the end of the second quarter, end of the third quarter, and then they do it
Oh,
first quarter. And then you also, so the first quarter pays out a little bit, second quarter pays out a little bit, third quarter pays out a little bit, and then the full game, the final score usually pays out like the grand prize. And people run these all the time. People run them to as fundraisers for their baseball teams to raise money for their kids' school. I'm surprised that you haven't put
yeah.
an
I've
audience on
actually
before.
the I remember. Yeah, I've never actually heard of that. I remember my senior year of high school. One of my teachers, for fun, he would always. I guess he got us into betting early because he would do. We would all bet on the point differential for the Seahawks games, whoever they were playing, and the winner got, I think, a candy bar of their choice. So going back to that, that's just personal anecdote. I was just thinking that just popped through my head. So I was like, oh, I didn't really bet. I don't really bet at all. I do like looking at odds. Like I have some friends in Portland that I text and I'm like, "Hey, can you put this bet down?" And sometimes I'm serious about it, and sometimes like I'm not, and I don't think they actually ever do put the bet down. But I told them to bet Corbin Carroll for Rookie of the Year because his odds were, I think it was minus 700 at one point. So plus 700 because James Outman for the Dodgers was the favorite, and then halfway to the season, Corbin Carroll's the odds were minus a lot, which is and so it would be fun, to be able to bet, but also, it's can be. I mean, sports gambling it can be addicting, and some people get caught up in it. So I think it'd be fun, but there are some downsides to it. And like you said, about you're watching the game, you're saying, "Oh, I don't want to watch this game because I'm anxious on this player getting this amount of hits or the team only winning by 1 run." But at the same time, that's what brings, and same with fantasy sports is it brings people to watch the game, vote, root for this particular player. So it's kind of, double-edged sword. There's the lows of it. And then also, when the player messes up, people are gonna start hating, or if the team messes up, people will hate the team or, hate the player as
But think
well.
about this. So, like, I often wonder if they're shooting themselves in the foot and don't even realize it. And let me explain what I mean. So, let's pretend that you move to a world where the majority of people are watching the game because of fantasy sports or because of betting, and they have 6 screens going on at the same time. What happens when it goes to commercial break?
For both of them or one of them?
So you have 6 TVs going, and you got all these guys on your fantasy team, and one of the TVs goes to commercial break. What are you doing now?
I'll turn my attention to another game.
Turning your attention to the other game. So are those commercials impacting you? So the
No.
question I have is, when do you get to a point where these TV commercials just don't work anymore and people stop paying for them? So this has already happened for non-sports. So when the DVR came out, TiVo came out first, and then hold on, I'll start this segment again in a second.
Mhm. I remember when until Brad comes back. I remember when I never had TiVo, but I had DVR, and DVR was crazy. Just being able to record TV shows and then watch them back. Well, Brett's back with us. So you were talking about when TiVo first came out.
Yeah, so like when TiVo first came out, it really eliminated television commercials for the people
Mm-hmm.
who had it because I could watch my show, commercials come, I skip them. I mean, you could do this with VHS tapes way, way, way back in the day, but it wasn't like there was a button and you just all of a sudden skip through them. So we now live in a world where people aren't watching commercials when they're watching regular television anymore because they skip it. Now everybody has a DVR. It comes standard with most cable subscriptions. However, there's one place where this is not true, and that is in sports. Because when you're watching sports, you watch it in real time. Now, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'll go to work, I'll watch the game later," but you can't do that because the results are revealed on social media, on the radio, whenever. Sports, you pretty much need to watch in real time. However, when the majority of people who are watching sports are not watching it to watch the outcome of their game, but are watching it to see an outcome of a specific player, then I'm no longer paying attention to those commercials anymore because I'm watching my player do his thing. It goes to commercial break, no big deal. I'm just going to go to this other screen. So the commercials are still going to be on, yes, but do those commercials have value for the advertiser if nobody's watching them? So when you see the NFL talk about, oh, well, we had 20 million people watch an NFL game over Christmas weekend, I'm like, okay, that's great, but so what? The so like they only make money when people watch the commercials. The fact that 20 million people are watching the game, it's a neat metric, but it's an irrelevant metric for the NFL because they're only making money if those 20 million people are watching the commercials. Now, that's not entirely true. Obviously, if I'm watching the game, then maybe as a result of that, I buy a ticket to a future game or I buy merchandise as a result of it. But as far as the TV revenue part of it goes, it only has value if I'm sticking around and watching the commercials. So, what's going to happen in the media business when people stop watching commercials? And it's sort of a rhetorical question because I'm not really sure I have the full answer for you here, but we already know what happened when commercials went away on TV, don't we? It led to the explosion of Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Apple, all of these subscription services because these companies are like, well, we can't make money on advertising anymore. We might as well sell a subscription service and run it ad free.
Mm-hmm.
And now Amazon comes around and says, oh, well, starting in January or February, we're going to charge $3 or $4 more a month and we're going to show ads, which is really just a trick to say, okay, we'll pay the $4 to upgrade so that you can continue not to watch ads. But people are watching less and less and less and less TV commercials. That's why all of these subscription programs are taking off. I mean, all the great shows are on the Hulus and the Netflix and the Amazon Primes now. So how is sports going to react when that same dynamic hits them? And you might say that might never happen if people are truly watching the game. But when people are not watching the game for the sake of the game, but watching it for the sake of the plays so that they can gamble on it, the entire dynamic is going to change. And this is why gambling is taking off because they're realizing I can make more money off the gambling than I can off the commercials. Commercials are fading, gambling is going up. This is why you're seeing the shift, and this is why they put on TV shows that are all about gambling, because that's where the future revenue is coming from. It ain't coming from commercials.
So would you say that, we talked about betting and sports betting and fantasy. So could you say that fantasy was really the first stepping stone to, having legal betting?
Yeah, it trained people. It paved the way.
Yeah, because all
And
the road because it started with rotary baseball because those guys in I think it was the guys in Jersey
yeah, there's a 30
would
for
go.
30 on ESPN. It's all
Yeah,
about
they people don't know it was called rotary. I mean, before it was
rotisserie.
called it's called rotisserie
It's called
baseball because they
rotisserie because of they were it was in a rotisserie chicken shop where they were
Yep.
doing the betting, so they started calling it rotisserie sports.
Yeah, but yeah, they were all like numbers guys, like a bunch of analytics dudes just looking at the numbers. And then I don't know what year, but it's certain to called fantasy sports. Um, but there are websites that have like Rotary World. Those are fantasy sports websites. They're still called Rotary a little bit. But yeah, it's funny if you just go back to it. It's like, oh, well, it's kind of the because people, a lot of leagues, the leagues I'm in, do a pool like the buy-in's $50, and then if you win, you get the all the money that's pooled. So it's
Right.
funny. I just this kind of talking about this kind of just popped in my head. That was really the first step to. It's really just another way to bet for sports betting, which is funny. I mean, there's other things that's like go in if this team wins, and also March Madness too. Those kind of big tournaments, um, because there's so many different outcomes as well.
So
You
what
know,
happens in the future? You go back to Shohei's contract, which is kind of where we started this whole conversation. And what happens in the future? VR right now is something that's really starting to take off.
hmm
What's going to happen when you don't need to go to the ballpark? You can put on your VR headset and have a better experience than going to the ballpark. It looks exactly like you're there. What happens when they start broadcasting live in VR? Like, why
Yeah,
would you ever need to go to the ballpark? You can sit in any seat you want, watch from any camera angle. Don't have to worry about the smelly guy next to you or the big head sitting in front of you, and you can watch any game from any spot. And I
de-
think that it's only a matter of time before that happens.
definitely. Okay, so we talked a little about we talked about sports betting and how it's changing the game in terms of how people watch it. But another thing I want to get into is AI. Also, with AI comes AR, augmented reality, and VR, virtual reality. And it's really been besides AI has been used for sports marketing, whether it's writing articles or coming out with different software. It's in a lot of things for the sports world. But lately, in the past couple of years, it's blown up in terms of how people watch the game. Like we talked about meta and how people can just put on their headsets and be courtside and watch their game courtside. Or you said maybe in a few years people will be able to watch the baseball game with their headset on. How do you think AI and VR and AR is kind of changing the game of sports marketing?
Well, I think from a sports marketing standpoint, it's just one more channel. Once you have that headset on and you're watching the game, think of the personalization that they can feed you for advertisements in a way that they've never been able to do it before. I mean, for the most part, when you're watching network TV and you're watching your game, or even you're watching cable and watching the game, you're seeing the same commercials that I'm seeing. Now, I remember there was a game on Amazon earlier this year where they tested running different commercials for people who already had Amazon Prime versus people who didn't have Amazon Prime in an effort to try to get people to buy Amazon Prime. And I thought that that was really neat that they could tailor commercials to people based on whether they had one service or another. Well, it begs the next question. How far away are we from being able to tailor commercials on television the same way you do on the internet, right? I mean, when you're on Facebook, the ads you see are very different from the ads that I see because they're based on the websites you've been to and maybe the things your computer heard you say when you were having a conversation with somebody. But TV hasn't really caught up on that technology, even though they should be able to. But one place where they could do it super easy is when you're watching the game in VR. That commercial you see on the scoreboard could be very different than the commercial that I see on the scoreboard. And I think that there are some real opportunities for that. And I think there are also opportunities to give you just a better game experience, not just like I was saying before, how you can be in a better seat, but what if there were opportunities for you to watch the player interviews at the end of the game, but you're right there standing in front of the player watching him, and like maybe they even pick on you to ask a question. There are just so many things that you could do with relative ease, especially as the cost of everything is coming down. And by that I mean, think about how expensive it used to be to have like a digital camera. Now everybody has one on their phone. Think about how expensive it used to be to have a big screen television with HT. Now you can go buy one for 80 bucks as long as you're
Since
happy with 36
TV
inches.
TVs are so cheap, it's insane.
Right. So
Yeah.
what happens? What happens when everybody is walking around with VR? They can shoot with VR and they can give every individual a personalized experience. It begs the question, why would I even go to the ballpark? And so they're going to have to come up with ways to get you to the ballpark that are better than that experience that you can have at home. Similar to, like, why are you watching Oppenheimer at home instead of in the movie theater? Because why the hell do I need to go to the movie theater when I can sit and watch it at home on my own TV from the comfort of my own home? Sports has not been able to duplicate that in a way that movies have been able to do ever since the advent of cable television. Sports has not been able to do that because they cannot duplicate the in-stadium experience. Within a year or two, they will. It's happening. Meta Quest 2 just came out, before the holidays for $700 now. In a year or two, it'll be 200. And once you can put everybody in a stadium, why am I going to pay 250 for a seat? So it's gonna change everything. And it's not something that's like I'm predicting the future. Like, this is happening. And the people who do it first are gonna have such a big head start on everybody else. Brands were starting to do this during COVID. Even several years ago, you were trapped at home. You couldn't go to a concert anymore. They were starting to put concerts in VR. I could watch my favorite band on VR because I couldn't go to the stadium,
Oh,
to the concert venue. And I'm just really surprised that it hasn't happened faster in the sports realm. But I think that's the biggest thing that you're going to see there change from a VR standpoint. Now, from an AI standpoint, you're already seeing these changes. Already seeing it. The biggest thing happened in the last week. The Dodgers just signed a Japanese player who's never pitched a single pitch in professional ball in the United States. How are they possibly able to do that? Well, very easily. They ran all of his statistics through an AI model versus all the teams that he played for, and it provided some data that said, based on what he's done, where he's pitched, this is what we project him to be doing at the major league level. And then they signed a guy for $320 million to pitch in the United States who's never thrown a single pitch at a professional level in the US before. And he instantly became the highest paid MLB player who's ever not thrown a pitch before, or who's never played before. And I thought that was fascinating. And this is not the first time you're going to see this. And in fact, it's just the beginning. There are so many college players that never get picked up because on the day that the scout goes to see them, they went 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts, or they don't have the right body type or whatever. And thanks to AI, you can now project how that person will be able to perform based on the program that they're in, the quality of their opponents, where they went to high school, and other things. And it's going to completely change the way that players get drafted, and where people get put into the lineup and how trades are done. I mean, imagine when you can drop into an AI algorithm that says, if I trade player A for player B, what's the impact going to be on the number of games that I win this year? Like, I don't even need a major league team to do that. Like, you could do that. Like, right now on ChatGPT, you could just drop that in for free and get an answer that's pretty close. And that's just just some random guy. Imagine if you're MLB and you have the highest levels of AI at your disposal and you're paying for some subscription-based AI algorithms with statistics in them. I mean, do you think MLB teams aren't already doing this? Of course they are. Like, how do you think the Dodgers are spending $700 million unless they're having some incredible analytics that's showing how they're going to get payback? Like, they're not just rich guys throwing money around. Somebody ran an algorithm and said, if I spend 700 million. So think about this. You put money in the stock market, money doubles every 7 years. So if I put $100 into the market, all things being equal, in 7 years, it's going to be worth 200,000. Okay, so now you took a rich dude and you gave Shohei 700 million, and pretend that the money wasn't like future earnings. Like, pretend you actually were paying him the 700 million, like, straight up front, and not for the next 40 years or whatever it is, but pretend. The question becomes, okay, if I can either give that money to him, or I can put that money in the stock market, and in 7 years, that 700 million will be worth 1.4 billion. And 7 years after that, so 14 years, it'll be worth 2.8 billion. That's just because of how money grows. So their question needs to become, okay, if I can either give that money to Shohei, but I need to get $2.8 billion back. I don't need to make 700 million. So before you were saying, oh, I can get that 700 million easy. They don't need 700 million back. They need 2.8 billion back. Because if they don't get that, they would have been better off just putting the money in the stock market and letting it grow. Now, again, it's not perfect math because I'm talking about every 7 years. So that would have been 14 years and his contract is 10 and they don't have to pay him until after. But it's the concept of this that you see a player making $100 million and they say, well, we can get that 100 million back in jersey sales. And they're missing the point. It's not the 100 million back. You need to get 200 million back in 7 years. So
Gotcha. Well, the thing about signing him, which I totally expected to happen, which is he's bringing over he'll bring over all. I mean, players will want to play with him because he's a fun guy. He's a great player, but also like the Japanese players. Like he won the World Baseball Classic with those guys. He was the team leader. Him and Yamamoto. I mean, Yamamoto was dominating that series, that whole World Baseball Classic. So he brings those guys over. So maybe in the future, he could be an ambassador for the Dodgers for bringing more of the Japanese guys over for them. So they could
but
also
back to my earlier point, though, when does winning become secondary to individual achievement so that people can do well on their fantasy teams and for online betting? When does winning become secondary? Right now, I think winning is probably still primary. It's why teams invest because they want to win. Like you open up any baseball statistical program, the number one stat now is WAR, wins against replacement, because wins
Mhm.
are what is important. That's what we're looking at. Are the Dodgers going to win the World Series? But at what point does the amount of money that the Dodgers going to get incrementally from a World Series, at what point is that less money than they will get from a year's worth of gambling on their individual players, of which they don't necessarily profit off of that because I'm not watching the commercials that come with it.
So you think it's possible that teams will look to make more money than actually winning? Is that
I'm
am I
saying that I'm saying that it is a very real possibility that it could happen.
it's
I'm
true.
saying that it's a very real possibility.
I mean, some especially you could. That's a very strong argument to make for small market teams too.
Yeah. I mean, think about everything we've set up until this point, right? Um, if they're not making their money off commercials anymore because people aren't watching them. So what's the biggest benefit of going to the World Series? Obviously, I like to win, so I can chest beat and say, "Woo, I won." But why do teams make more money on the World Series? Because they get more TV revenue. Why do they get more TV revenue? Because there's more commercials. It's very simple. When you get to a point where people aren't watching those commercials, you lose that benefit. Now they still get more ticket sales from the games and concessions, and I get that, but that money pales in comparison to media. And by the way, media is still huge. I mean, the contracts being signed for media rights are in the billions now. So I'm not
Hmm.
saying that that's going to change in a year or two, but I'm talking about the life of a Shohei contract, which is a 10-year deal. Is it unreasonable that in 10 years, like 10 years ago, were people even watching Hulu and Netflix and Amazon Prime? Like maybe, but they were at their infancy if they were. What's going to be different in 10 years? It's going to be a whole new world. And what I'm saying is it is a very, very real possibility that the entire revenue model will have shifted and that people will not be watching the commercials. And therefore, it'll become more important than ever that they get that revenue from somewhere else. And how do they do that? Gambling.
Yeah.
And you're already starting to see it. It's why all of the shows are gambling shows. It's why the bottom, the lower thirds on your screen is just tickers with gambling. It's already happening.
Even
Manfred speeding
even
up the
the
game.
sorry, even every time if you watch an NFL game, if they when it's fourth down or they're in field goal territory, they do like the game probability, or at least I don't know for the others. I've definitely seen it on like NBC and Amazon on the Thursday night games, but at first I was like, oh, maybe that's cool for um, people that want to see what the analytics say. But then now that we're talking about the betting part more, I think it's also mainly for the betting too. Even Apple TV, which does a great job with baseball. It's really cool. They have 4K cameras, so you can watch the game in like ultra HD. They do every time a player's up, it's like, oh, when there's a guy on first, what's the chance of him getting a hit? Or when there's two outs, what's the chance of him at least getting on base? They do that kind of stuff.
All right, you want another projection? I just thought of it. I just came up with this. And it's not going to happen in a year, maybe not two, but it will happen. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to give you not an extra timeout because that'll change the whole dynamic. They will give you a longer timeout that you can use in the last 2 minutes. Now, why would they do that? Because the game's on the line. Betting is at its hottest, right? I'm making a comeback. I'm running down the field. You give me an extra 15 minutes to bet during the highest peak moment of that game. How much extra revenue do you think you're going to generate in those extra 15 seconds?
Yeah.
That kicker's about to kick the field goal. He either kicks it and they win or he misses it and they lose. How about we keep the betting window open an extra 15 seconds? Mark my words, write this down that we talked about it today. It will happen. And maybe it won't be a timeout. Maybe they'll extend the commercial break or throw an extra commercial break in there, but it will happen because they need that extra gambling revenue.
And it's weird though, because you see the time, because in the NBA, the league has actually taken efforts to shorten how long it takes. Because before, um, the NBA towards the last 2 minutes of the game would be, 7 minutes because they would take 2 minutes to to look over, not even 2 minutes, probably like 4 minutes or 3 minutes to look over a call, and then it just ruins the momentum of the game. So I wonder if, they'll make the timeouts longer in basketball for the betting thing, even though they're kind of trying to make the last 2 minutes shorter. So it's
But
really,
it's a
and
different moment though, right? So if a play is being argued and it's on replay and that's causing a delay, that's not a betting moment. In
oh,
football, when the kicker is sitting there waiting to kick that ball, that's either going to win the game or lose the game, that's a betting moment. So start to think about what those betting moments are. So for example, when a game's going to overtime, just add you'll see an extra minute commercial break added before we go into overtime. Why? Because it's a huge betting moment. Same thing in the NHL. Add an extra minute of commercials before you go into overtime. Big betting moment. You're going to see that happening if you haven't already seen it. This might be happening already, and I might not even be aware of it. But like go back and check how long a break there is between end of regulation and overtime now versus call it 3 years ago before
yeah.
betting was legalized everywhere.
You could call it a no sweat bet timeout or something like this.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's it. That's actually a pretty good prediction. I
I
wrote
think
that down. I wrote that down in my notes right here.
perfect. But I would, I mean, I guess what I would say for anybody watching this, like I look through sports as with a different lens. Most people watch sports as entertainment, or I want my team to win. I'm a fan, I'm a fanatic. I watch it through a very different lens. And I always watch it with the mindset of like, okay, how are these guys trying to make money? What's their revenue plan? Because at the end of the day, the only difference between like watching your sports team and going to watch like a Bruce Springsteen concert, like it's kind of not any different. Like if you go to Bruce Springsteen, you're paying for 3 hours of entertainment. If you go to a Red Sox game, you're paying for 3 hours of entertainment. So how did the sports team find ways to get incremental monetization above and beyond the ticket price that you already paid for? They're selling jerseys, there's gambling, there's all the stuff that's piled onto it. And they have a little bit less of that at like a concert venue. You can still buy your concert shirt, you can go buy beer and all of that, but you can't bet on a Bruce Springsteen concert, for example. I mean, it
What
sounds
song will he? What's I mean, there's that joke during uh quarantine when there wasn't any sports on. There were jokes and memes being like, okay, today we're gonna bet on the weather, and the temperature is either gonna be under 50 or above 50. Just
right.
just like meaningless stuff like that.
So I would say, well, what's next? What incremental ways can you monetize sports? Because there's people at MLB and they're just sitting around in a room and that's all they're thinking about is what can we do to generate incremental revenue out of the people who are paying attention to us. NFL has 20 million people who watch the games on Christmas. Okay, well, what can I do to generate incremental revenue out of those people? NBA tried it. They tried it by adding that extra in-game, in-season tournament. And that probably did generate some revenue for them. They're probably going to brag about how many people watched it and how great that was for the sport because it got people to watch those games. But I think in that particular instance, how much is that going to pull away from their championships at the end? Like, how many casual fans are going to say, well, I already watched a basketball championship this year. I don't need to watch another one. Now, for the diehard fans, they'll probably still watch it. But I'm talking for everybody else. Will the net gain for viewership actually increase as a result? Now, in year one, it probably will because it's new. It's the same way in baseball. They had all these new rule changes and attendance went up. By the way, very misleading. Of course it went up because a year ago it was still COVID and people couldn't buy tickets at Christmas because we didn't know if we were going to have a season. So of course this year tickets went way up. We'll see what happens next year if they go up again. But it went up primarily because people were bouncing back from 2021 when you weren't allowed to leave your house. And on top of that, they wanted to see what all the new rule changes were. If they can maintain that in 2024, 2025, then I'll really be impressed. Same thing with basketball. Will they see attendance go up this year in viewership as a result of this new series? Of course they were. It's a brand new thing. No one's ever seen it before. But is it going to detract from the relevancy of a championship? 100%, not even close. And will that have an impact in year two and year three? It will. By the way, this is part of the reason why like the Olympics only happens every 4 years. Because if it happened every year, you wouldn't care. But by having it every 4 years, every time it pops around, you're like, wow, that's exciting. I got to go check it out because it's not going to happen again for another 4 years. And I think that if the NBA isn't careful about this, they're going to get burnout on that extra game that they added.
I was looking at NBA viewership, and the prime the prime for NBA viewership was during the LeBron Cavs and the Miami Braun Cavs and sorry, Miami LeBron team and the Braun Cavs when they played the Warriors consistently.
Yeah.
Um, and as you could say, maybe is because the super team, those were the years of the super team. And now we don't, you could argue the Los Angeles Clippers have a super team with Harden and Paul George and Kawhi, even, I mean, Russell Westbrook maybe. But now there's really only two players per team that you could really call them a super team. I mean, the Suns, Bradley Beal, KD and Booker, but maybe, the more super teams you have, like I'm definitely going to tune in to the Suns game tonight because KD, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal will all be playing.
Right.
So I wonder if they want to bring super teams back. That's just an interesting take. Who knows?
Who
Maybe
knows?
viewership will definitely be up for MLB is my guess because of the Dodgers, at least Dodger games, because are going to want to watch all those guys play.
Well, and the best part about a player signing with the Dodgers, thinking with your marketing hat on, keeps people up late, right? So, now you watch the regular game at 8 and you watch the next game at 10:30 or 11, whenever that is on, because you want to watch the Dodgers play.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I remember in I forgot what year it was, but they moved a lot of Mariner games. Most Mariner games started 7:10, and then they moved it to 6:40. They moved some games to 6:40. And I don't know if it was because of traffic in Seattle or, I remember I watched the Mariner game when I was on the East Coast in extra innings. And I went to bed the game ended like 1. I remember watching a Lakers Mavs game and the game ended at 1. So yeah, maybe earlier start times too. My cousin who says when he watches Monday Night Football, he says he says sometimes he'll fall asleep during the game because he has trouble staying up because it ends
Right.
so late on the East Coast.
Yeah, I think Monday Night Football is very much a like put it on while you're going to bed type of
Hmm.
activity. And then you wake up in the morning and find out the final score.
Yeah, that's the one plus I always say living on the West Coast is waking up at 10 a.m. and there's football on. Um, so yeah, I always find that really awesome about being on the West Coast. Any final thoughts you want to say?
No, but I think this is great. This is a lot of fun. I actually came up with some new concepts of my own today that I hadn't really thought through, but by talking through them with you, I'm like, oh wow, I think we came up with some really good ideas and some really good future projections. Like it'll be fun to go back and watch this in a couple of years and see how much of this we got right. But I think if there's one thing that's certain, is that what's going to happen in 5 years, like we won't even see it coming. Like it's just, the same way social media just showed up one day, like someday they're going to be like, oh, you can start watching games in VR starting next year. And you're going to be like, what? Like it's just going to come out of nowhere. There's just going to be new things. And it'll be interesting to see how pro sports continue to find ways to monetize the new technologies. So,
Yeah, and or
but
30-second TikToks asking players what their favorite Taylor Swift songs are.
exactly. But yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, hope to have you on again soon. Maybe when the season starts, or a few when the NFL season's over, when everything changes, when it comes to marketing, you're the guy to talk to.
Perfect. Sounds good.
All right, thank you.